to the Garden Report. We're going to talk Celtics Hawks one more time with Lauren Williams. Welcome back, Lauren.
Thank you.
After Boston beat Atlanta in 6 games, they're moving on to Philly. Atlanta going home, not without a fun finale, though. Game 6 was really exciting. Went down the wire. Hawks held the lead in the fourth quarter. Looked for a minute or two like there might be a Game 7 between these teams. And in the end, Lauren, I didn't have the Celtics sweeping this series like a lot of people did. I had 5, and I felt like Boston was gonna dominate the series for the most part,
Mhm.
but really the last 3 games, Game 4 was close. The Hawks won Game 3, obviously. Game 5, they come back down 13 late, and then
Mhm.
Game 6 was a battle until 5 minutes to go.
Yeah.
I thought this was a really useful series for the Celtics in the end, and the Hawks, I think, came out of it looking like a better team than I think a lot of people thought they were coming in.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. I think when we talked ahead of was it game 1? I think I had them in 5 as well. I didn't think that, they would push it to 6 as well as they did. I was maybe a little too optimistic. I was like, maybe they could pull off a 6. But if I'm being honest, their performance in game 5 actually had me even way more optimistic than I should have been. And I was like, maybe because they're going to be at home, maybe they can pull off another one and push this to 7. But I'm sure for the Celtics' sake, they're really happy that that did not happen.
Yeah, they that would have been brutal,
Yeah.
especially Saturday game would have been Game 7 today as we talk.
Hmm.
Would have left one day rather between Game 7 of that series and Game 1 of the Philly series. So you had to get that done. Great playmaking down the stretch. Tatum broke out of a slump for much of the series with
Hmm.
few key baskets late. Al Horford, who started so slow in that game, had a huge game,
Yep.
go ahead 3 rather, and put
Hmm.
back and double-double. I thought he was just amazing in that game. And then uh, Marcus Smart made up
Yep.
for mistakes late in Game 5. Everybody just sort of stepped up for Boston in those final
Yeah.
moments. And what was it, an 11-0 run? Hawks couldn't score at all. The inbound after was a pretty embarrassing moment, trying to
To
get
be
in 4
fair, Trae
times.
Young said that, that was a play that they never practiced before.
I've never really seen an inbound out of that spot, at least in
Yeah,
recent memory.
and, it's so funny because this is the second time this season that Quinn Snyder has kind of thrown something at the team that they've never practiced. I'm sure they've watched it on film and everything like that, but they never actually gotten a chance to practice it. And so for the Hawks' sake, that's indicative of how much Snyder trusts the court vision and abilities of Trae Young.
Yeah, and Young turned it around.
Mhm.
35 and 13, I believe, in Game 5.
Mhm.
The game-winning 3 came out with 25 in the first half of Game 6. By the end of the series, the Celtics were looking pretty perplexed with
Yeah.
how to handle him. Like, they were switching, they were doubling at times. They
Mhm.
dropped on him, which you weren't seeing much drop late in Game 6 after how much he
Right.
tortured them with the floater. And the 3 started falling too. He had a few off-balance threes in that first
Mhm.
half in Game 6 that scared you if you're the Celtics. He looked like he was just gonna keep rolling in that second half, but then 1 for 13 to close. I don't know how you leave this series feeling about him because it started so poorly, caught fire midway through, and then could barely find a basket in the second half as they try to force a Game 7.
For sure. I think the big thing is that you could see the effects of them not having DeJounte Murray in game
Yeah.
5. And even though Quinn Snyder said that he didn't think Trae Young looked gassed in that game, I think you could tell that he was feeling the effects of playing 44 minutes in game 5 because he played that entire second half. But I think the Celtics should, in my opinion, use that series against the Hawks as a way to really evaluate how they're going to, defend the 76ers and how much they need to buckle down and be focused just because some of the and this is not to take away credit from what the Hawks were able to do in games 5 and 6, but it should really shine the spotlight on how much focus these guys need to have in facing a team like the 76ers in the Eastern Conference semifinals.
Yeah, especially fouling, which
Yeah.
was a topic in the Celtics locker room after some real frustration after Game 6 with
Yeah.
the way they called Trae Young. There was one play too in Game 6 where it almost looked like Young moved his arms up like an inch,
Yeah.
and like it was at the top of the key. I
Yep.
think it might have been Brown guarding him or maybe Smart, and he just moved his arm up an inch, and they put him at the foul line. Everyone's just
Yeah.
like, "What?" But that's the way Embiid plays too. That's the way Harden plays, and I think there is a lot of carryover between avoiding fouling, staying in front of guys,
Mhm.
switching and handling pick and rolls, and all the different things that the Hawks threw at them. This I can probably list off like 10 things, but in my mind, as frustrating as the series ended up being for a lot of Celtics fans,
Mhm.
I think it prepared them well for stuff that's going to come up.
I agree. I mean, just like you said, Embiid is a guy that you never want to say that players hunt for foul, but the way he plays, he gets the benefit of the whistle most of the time. And so, yeah, as you said, the Celtics are going to just have to make sure that they're playing a little bit more controlled in how they defend, particularly Derek White and Marcus Smart, who unfortunately for the Celtics, were getting the brunt of some of those flabbergasting fouls in Game 6.
Yeah, and to close it out on the Hawks, I don't know where it's going to go. You were at exit interviews.
Hmm.
Murray, I think a frustrating end for him, and trying to make this young Murray thing work late in the year.
Yeah.
It's almost fitting that they couldn't have him out there in Game 5, and then Game 6, he just has this baffling first half where he scores 0 points and ends up hitting a few late. But they missed him late in the
Hmm.
series as they try to extend it. And again, it's a frustrating series for him where he makes contact with the ref late in
Right.
Game 4, gets suspended, comes back in Game 6, and doesn't play well at all there. I don't know how to feel about Atlanta because I come out of this looking at them and saying, all right, there's something here.
Yeah.
Snyder coached them up. Young caught fire. Murray, if he figures out how to play next to Young and those two build a tandem, there's a lot of young talent around them, and I think played well in the series. Hunter
Hmm.
got going. I
Hmm.
thought Okongwu had some really strong moments late in the
Hmm.
series. John Collins even got going.
Yeah.
So how are they all looking at this after the series ended, looking forward? Because I think this series, at the very least for them, could make them feel like, all right, let's run this back for a full season with Snyder.
Yeah, if I'm being honest, Bobby, I don't see them completely running it completely back. Just because you have to make some changes, especially I think the big thing was in going 29-31 under Nate McMillan and then Quinn Snyder coming in and them kind of hovering around 500. It's clear that some changes to the roster need to happen because it wasn't just a coaching thing. And by all accounts, this front office is very confident in a Young and Murray backcourt. And, as frustrating as it was for some Hawks fans that it took a really long time for Young and Murray to kind of figure out how to play with each other, the two of them are very much in the boat of things that are going to be exciting in the future just take time to build. And Quinn Snyder actually had a really good quote in his exit interview where you think about any relationship that you have. It doesn't matter whether it's a professional one or a personal one. Things like that take time to build. And so I think they're asking for a little bit more patience in terms of them figuring out how this backcourt is supposed to work. But then you look at how Garland and Mitchell were able to make things work in Cleveland a little bit more quicker. So yeah, I think, when you're looking at this roster, yes, Young and Murray are definitely going to stay. But then you look at the front court and you see guys like Clint Capella, who played really well for the Hawks this season, John Collins, who was a little bit streaky up and down, and he's always going to be in trade rumors. And then DeAndre Hunter, who just got that contract extension before the season began. So, yeah, even though Hunter did get that contract extension, I don't think he's totally immune from trade eligibility just because he is a guy that a lot of teams will be looking at because he does have that huge potential of being that 3-and-D wing. And he is going to bring a lot of value to any front court that wants to go out and try and acquire him. But I do think Quinn Snyder really, really likes DeAndre Hunter. So it's hard for me to believe that, he would endorse them moving Hunter unless they're getting something incredibly big back in return, or more comparable. So if we're looking at the front court, I think it's going to be either John Collins or Clint Capella, just because I do think you mentioned the young talent, guys like Onyeka Okongwu and Jalen Johnson did bring a lot of confidence to Quinn Snyder, and I think he really likes how they play. So, if anything, I think it's gonna be John Collins or Clint Capella that this team really takes a look at, and says, are these the guys that we can win a championship with? I think that evaluation in the front office, those are the two guys that they start with.
Yeah, and they gave out so many extensions as we
Yeah.
talked about before the series, so everything's locked up here across the board. It's tough because every player you look at, you can say, "This guy's helpful," but then they're either blocking someone else,
Mhm.
they're redundant with someone else in the case
Mhm.
of Collins and Capella. Uh, there something needs to mix up here. Even,
Yeah.
I'm sure they're gonna think about Young because
Yeah.
that's the real difficult spot I come out of in this
Mhm.
series is that almost everyone across the board played well,
Mhm.
but the Celtics' ability to pick on Young, his inconsistency throughout the series,
Mhm.
and his, again, continued unwillingness to get off the ball next to Murray
Mhm.
is such a challenge for them, and they're constantly working around it. You talked about the relationship aspect. I could really see Snyder and Young talking throughout this series and
Mhm.
just trying to get on the same page, even at practice, like just running through stuff. Um, I, I, I don't know what you can get for him, but
Yeah.
I have to assume it's going to be something that they at least take a look at and think about because now you do have Murray, who you could
Mhm.
feasibly build around if you wanted to take a ton back for Young and kind of reset around a younger
Right.
roster. Maybe step back into the lottery for a year. That's probably tough for Snyder after
Yeah.
you just signed him long term, and he probably wants to, start winning here. But if you can't do it with this core, and you can't
Mhm.
trade a Collins, you can't trade a Capella, you can't trade a lot of these guys that they've tried to trade already. I think you go back to Young, and
Mhm.
I don't know who would be a suitor. Brooklyn, they have a lot to offer.
Yeah.
Portland, is there like a Lillard Young thing? There's
Yeah.
some options I'd have to imagine, and I'm sure Snyder wants to try this Young thing for a full season. But
Mhm.
right now, you're just so stuck in the middle that makes it hard to rebuild.
Yeah.
And when you're stuck behind so many contenders in the East, you're probably not going to the finals anytime soon.
For sure. I think the thing that the Hawks are really going to have to think about is, yeah, you're right. I wouldn't be surprised if they do take a look at Young, but just listening to Landry Fields and Quinn Snyder in their exit interviews, it just seems that they've bought into trying this Young Murray pairing for a little bit longer. So whether that's something that they look at the trade deadline, maybe you can't totally rule that out, but they definitely want to make sure that they're doing their full due diligence. Because if you give up 3 first-round picks for a guy like DeJounte Murray, of course you don't want to cut your losses too soon. But then also you want to make sure that you just paid Trey Young, and he's getting what, 40 something million um over the next couple of years. So that makes it a little bit harder for him to be somebody that teams might want to trade for.
Yes. So looking back on this series one more time, we'll kick ahead to Boston in just a minute.
Mhm.
So many moments I love from this one, and I was
Yeah.
writing them all down today. Horford pointing at the bench. I still don't know if he was talking about a fan
Yeah.
or some people were saying it might have been Bogdanovich that he was pointing at there, but just so much pointing in this series.
So much.
Him pointing at the bench. Murray was pointing at White after he hit
Yep.
a big three over him. I think Joe said that Murray asked how his day was doing when he was yelling at the bench in game 1 or 2 there. So there was some nastiness to this series, but also
Yeah.
respect. Like I
A
remember
lot of
Capella
respect.
just praising Horford up and down and how difficult
Mhm.
he was to
D-
guard, and
Yeah.
Murray and White's mutual respect. They both played so well in this series at times.
Mhm.
And even Young, who was berated by the Boston crowd for the
Yeah.
first time ever that I can think of for an opponent in Boston, looked at it and just said, "Oh, that's respect. I get it. Like, I'm
Yeah.
cool with that."
Especially when they started chanting "F you" to him in the 4th quarter when he was at the line for those 2 free throws. He we like, when we asked him about it, he's like, "They're not doing that for everybody, so I take that as a sign of respect." It's bizarre how they look at things, throughout these series, but you're right, there's definitely a bit of mutual respect between these 2 teams. But one thing, Bobby, that I definitely wanted to ask you about is that Hawks fans are very curious about where Jalen Brown stands within the Celtics organization, because they're reading into him wearing the Atlanta Braves hat and paying a lot of respect to guys like Trey Young and DeJounte Murray throughout this series as a sign that he wants to come back home to Atlanta. So I'm curious for you, where do you see this team being in terms of Jalen Brown's future?
I think he's gonna make All NBA, so
Yeah.
I they can offer him 300 million.
Mhm.
That takes him out of the trade market for a year, but you're probably going year to year with him after that,
Mhm.
and he has expressed some frustrations, as we talked about before, with his role on the team and with the city and all of that. I know Houston fans are getting similarly excited because Ime Udoka ends up there, and Brown was a big fan of him. I just don't see Brown leaving the Celtics in the next year here. Especially where, and we're gonna get to this in a minute, it just looks
Mhm.
like the East is wide open for this team now to make the finals again. Maybe that leads to a championship, and I've talked with other people about whether that makes it more or less likely he stays here.
Mhm.
The 300 million just seems hard to pass up
Yeah.
to me, especially where he took less on his last deal. And, in this new CBA, you can offer, I think, 140% of the
Mhm.
previous contract, and that counts for teams to trade for him too. So if Brown goes to the team this summer and says, "All right, I'm ready to move on," yeah, Atlanta's one of those teams you look at because I don't know, would they offer Young? We had this conversation before game one.
Yeah.
Um, that among everybody who's on the board here is probably the player who's most intriguing to me. And you
Mhm.
don't want it to end up there if you're the Celtics. You want Brown to play for the Celtics forever. Brown, I thought, was the MVP of this series, frankly.
Agreed.
He
Just
was just unstoppable.
exactly, and I don't think there might have been one game, and I think that was game 3 where he just kept getting into some foul trouble and just couldn't get going. But then the final 3 games, he was just
He
huge.
won game four, a close
Yes.
game four.
And in game 5, when, the Celtics were, especially Jason Tatum, for, when I say struggle, it's very relative because he still
Yeah.
had 19 points, which is so funny because not everybody
He
can.
ends up with 27, 10, and 5 in a
Yeah,
bad series, I thought, for him.
yeah. So I think Jalen Brown is just a very dynamic player, and it's just gonna be so interesting to see how things shake out for him after this season.
Especially because I think he believes that he can be a franchise player for a
Agreed.
team, and where
Agreed.
better to do it than at home, and he had other comments in some of these post games about, like, him sitting in the loge at
Yeah.
the arena there or the balcony at the arena there when he was younger, and just
Yeah,
memories
exactly.
being in the city. I think he still wants to do a lot of work in Atlanta, and I think
Mhm.
that's one of the frustrations he's had with Boston is he hasn't been able to accomplish things off the court that he hoped to in
Mhm.
Boston, despite his best efforts there. So that really is the story of the offseason for Boston is does the deal quickly get done between him and the team,
Mhm.
especially if he makes All NBA? And if it doesn't, you almost
Where does
have
he
to look to
Yeah,
trade him at that point because
yeah.
there's not much more you can offer than 300 million.
Yeah, the downside with that is with, it would have to be, if Atlanta is in the conversation in any way, it would have to be them offering Trey Young, because it's kind of hard for me to, or I guess maybe DeJounte Murray, but it's just hard for me to see them having enough assets to bring him in, and it would have to be a player for player swap, because they just don't have enough first round picks coming up, because they traded most of them
Right.
away for
And I
Murray.
don't think picks are appealing to Boston anyway at that
Yeah,
point. You need talent to continue to contend around Tatum. And we're gonna drive people crazy with this conversation,
yeah.
but it is it is a real one.
It is.
I don't think anyone knows where Jalen's at right now.
Yeah.
And fortunately, again, so great in the series, plays
Mhm.
through the hand injury. His forcefulness, I wish sometimes was one that the team followed at times more than some of Tatum's more passive moments, especially
Mhm.
game 5. I just thought Tatum was brutal late in that game. They weren't able to get Brown the ball enough. But they figured it out between those two.
Mhm.
I think they hit their 24th game, which is just rocketing up the all-time leaderboards of
Yeah.
30-point games by teammates. They're 23-1 in those games. And I remember I asked Tatum earlier this season about, I think they passed Pippen and Jordan in 30-30 games for teammates. And he was like, we're not as bad as you guys said we were, but we're not Pippen and Jordan yet either,
Right.
which was one of my favorite answers of the year. We'll talk a little more Celtics before we get you out of here. First,
Sure.
though, people got to know we're brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel.com/Boston is where you can continue to bet on the NBA playoffs and baseball with uh, FanDuel being the official partner of Major League Baseball. I got to see a baseball game down in Atlanta, my first
Yeah.
MLB game this year, which was a good one.
What do you think of the Braves?
I loved it. Great park, lots of green scenery in the background. A little far from downtown, which I didn't
Very
love.
far. Very.
Yeah. So I actually had to rush back. I had to leave after the ninth to get to game 4. So
Mhm.
didn't catch the whole game, but a good amount of it. And FanDuel is where you're going to bet on each game this MLB season. NBA playoffs, I was looking at some odds. The Celtics are, I think, minus 310 in the series against the 76ers, which is going to be interesting. We're going to kick around that in just a second here.
Mhm.
But go to FanDuel.com/Boston, deposit 10, bet 5, and you're going to get $200 in bonus bets when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com/Boston. So head over there and check that out. Of course, $10 deposit, $5 first bet, and you'll get your $200 bonus. So let's take a look at this series, Lauren. I don't know what you're expecting out of it, but I got a little bold on our post-game show on Game 6 and said maybe the Celtics could sweep this series.
Oh, I think that's a very, very, very bold.
I think it's bold, but Embiid is hurt coming in. Harden
Yeah.
hobbled late in the series, and the Celtics already took 3 out of 4 against Philly late this year and nearly had the 4th game shorthanded. This is obviously a matchup that they've dominated going back
Right.
years, so it's hard to sweep any series, but if there's
This.
any, I think it's this one.
I It's really hard for me to think that Philly would it'll be competitive, but it's just really hard for me to believe that this will be a sweep. I think this series goes to 5 or 6 games. It's just yeah, I can't Sorry, I'm reading some of the comments and somebody said, "Lauren, LOL." Yeah. But it's just very difficult for me to see that. We've just seen so many times how even hurt Joel Embiid can just put this team on their back. And yes, Tyrese Maxey can be a little bit streaky here or there, but in the playoffs, he's just been absolutely amazing. Um, Averaging what 21 points per game in the postseason. So he just needs to get hot, and it's a wrap. So it's just hard for me to see it being a sweep.
Yeah, and I wonder what Embiid will look like when he ultimately plays. He got
Yeah,
ruled doubtful for game 1 today. I was wondering what they had behind him, and they actually do have more than I thought they did.
yeah,
Paul Reed
Paul
was really
Reed.
good in round 1 against Brooklyn. He
Mhm,
keeps getting better and better, it seems, because there were
mhm,
times where he would just sit on the bench most games and not play at all. 15 rebounds in the closeout game for them. Harrell has his limitations in the playoffs, but he's a
right.
veteran who can score and play the pick and roll with Harden. And that's going to be what's most enticing, I think, for them with Embiid out is as good as Harden and Embiid have been. They have this weird pick and roll where Embiid doesn't really roll. He just kind of rolls to like the high post and then just does his isolation game against whoever he's left with there. To have some guys who are actually going to roll and finish and let
Mhm,
Harden rock a little bit, I think is going to be interesting here. But I just don't love the depth of that Philly team
right.
beyond some of their main pieces. And like you said, Maxey has to play well. Harden has to play well.
Tobias has to play. Harris has to play well.
Yeah, and that's a guy who I so often is out there, but you don't
Confounding.
notice he's out there.
Yep. It's just confounding. But I mean, he is averaging 20.3 points in the postseason. So, um, he just has to get hot in just one game and he can take over. So, yeah, the depth isn't great beyond those first four guys. But we've seen with Niang, he can also get hot at any moment, knocking threes down. So I do think the Celtics have a much deeper team, but the Sixers have a lot of talent.
Yep. So do you look at the Celtics now, and Young said this, of course, after game 6, as a prohibitive favorite in the East
Oh
now,
yeah,
that the Bucks
I
are out,
yeah.
the the Knicks
Honestly,
are rolling, but they're a little
before
banged up.
before the playoff season, not even the playoffs, at the beginning of the season, I had it being a Celtics Nuggets final. Obviously now it's a little bit different with Kevin Durant in the West for Phoenix, but I still think that the Nuggets have a much deeper team than the Suns. So I still stand by that. I think it's going to be a Nuggets Celtics finals, and I have the Celtics taking it all.
Yeah, and as convinced as I am by my pick in this series, there are some tough second round ones
Yeah,
shaping up. That Nuggets Suns one is,
it's going to be brutal, but it's going to be
yeah.
so fun to watch.
Yeah, and not only that, but I'm stunned the Suns are favorited in it. Of course, FanDuel
Mhm.
has Suns as favorites coming in. Nuggets home court health. Murray playing super well too out of the first round, and Jokic, as much
Mhm.
as he's been criticized for his playoff performance, is the only player averaging the numbers he is in NBA history through 50 playoff games. So he's getting it done, and I think he's just a brutal matchup for Ayton. So
Yeah.
I haven't considered the Nuggets going to the finals all that much, but given that the Suns struggled a little bit against an injured Clippers team round
Mhm.
one, and the Nuggets just sort of rolled through the Wolves, I'm leaning Nuggets in that series,
Yeah.
even though I picked the Suns out of the West originally.
I know we're still waiting for the who will be facing the Lakers
Round
in the
two.
next round, but a Lakers Kings series will be really really
Or
interesting.
Lakers Warriors.
Or like either one will be really interesting. I
You
do.
know, I'm still dreaming of Celtics Lakers finals.
Oh,
That's what I've been dreaming
I
of for
know
a long time.
historically that'll be good to kind of have a modern battle between those two franchises, but I don't know. I still I'm still leaning Nuggets.
So in the East, is there anything you
Is there
stack it
anyone?
up, and it's
Yeah.
it's funny because Philly, we just hit on that. I don't
Mhm.
see a huge threat here for Boston in round two. So if they move on to the East Finals, it's Miami, who brought them 7 games last year and who they avoided in round 1 through the Hawks'
Mhm.
victory, and now they might just come around again with
I
Butler's
know.
37 points per game, which would be crazy. I was sorta talking in jest on Twitter about, anxiety in Boston over the Heat, but it's real.
It
Like,
is.
if you see Heat Celtics in the East Finals, everyone's gonna be like, "Uh-oh, Butler's
Right.
coming." But they're also missing Hero and Oladipo. And then the
Yeah,
Knicks
and I was
beat
gonna say, I think the Celtics are just they're just much deeper than the Heat that, even if say one of the Jays has an off game, I think that they just have enough talent on that roster that, if Bam can't handle what's going on with Horford or, same thing Clint kind of warned about, that Horford can stretch the floor. And if Bam's not out there, who's gonna be guarding that?
I don't know at this point with
Yeah,
them.
exactly. Exactly.
I'm trying to even think because they traded Deadman after that
Yep.
weird incident. They've had the weirdest year ever, and I had to do my apology cam for the Heat because I didn't see them as any kind of threat in the East. For them to knock off the Bucks in 5
Yeah.
and do it with 2 10-point comebacks in fourth quarters, with Butler playing like Jordan,
Mhm.
frankly, like, that felt like probably what people felt like watching Jordan, watching him in that first round. I can't rule them out, even though this Knicks team looks
Yeah.
fun, aggressive, dominant, versatile, and deep. That's gonna be what's really crazy if it's New York, Boston round 3.
Exactly.
I
That's
don't think either city would survive that series.
no. Somebody had a really good question. They said not to overlook the Sixers, but who would you rather face, the Celtics, Heat or Knicks? And I think if we want them to have a competitive series, I would say the Knicks. But Matchup wise, ideally, I think the Heat, just because the Celtics just have a little bit more depth that can kind of make things difficult for the Heat.
There's just something intangible about that Heat series at this
Yeah.
point. Like, the same stuff we watched between these teams, the Hawks and Celtics in game 5, where the Celtics are cruising to the finish line, about to clinch the series, and then something just stops mentally for them. That's what impacts them most against the Heat, who
Yeah.
I think they went 2-2 against this year. They actually went 1-3 against the Knicks. So as much as it seemed like they got a break avoiding the Bucks,
Mhm.
those are 2 teams that still gave them issues during the year.
You're right.
And I'm
Exactly.
just yeah, as much as I'm dreaming of Lakers Celtics,
Yeah.
Knicks Celtics, New York, Boston, both fans going to each other's arenas, and those
Mhm.
2 crowds sounds super enticing to me.
And
It would just be
I was gonna say
chaos.
Brunson is just clicking on all cylinders now. There's something about his presence in the playoffs where he was already playing well in the regular season, but he just turns it on, and I just have flashbacks to him on the Mavericks last year and how he kind of handled the Jazz
Stunning that he's not in
without
Dallas after that.
Luka.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's gonna be, if it's the Knicks, it's gonna be a battle for sure.
Yeah, and we will see how it goes starting Monday, Celtics 76ers game
Yep.
1 in Boston. We'll have all the coverage here on the Garden Report and CLNS Media, of course. We're saying goodbye to Lauren and the Hawks. Anything good coming, Lauren, this offseason for you, or even just over the next
I'm
few weeks?
Right now, I am just thinking about rest and catching up on rest.
Yeah, me too, between these series.
For sure. Get as much as you can. Rest that voice, Bobby.
Yep. Thank you, Lauren, for joining us a couple of times here on the Garden Report. And of
Of
course,
course.
check all her coverage over the off season and into next year at the Atlanta Journal Constitution. You have a podcast as well,
I do. The Hawks report.
the Hawks Report. So go subscribe to that if you want your Hawks coverage over the off season. This could be a fun series again next year if these 2
Yeah.
teams are able to meet. And I'm glad we got it this year. It ended up being more fun than I thought. I have a recap coming up on Boston Sports Journal, some of the moments we kicked around. So go check that out as well. We should have a Sixers Celtics series preview coming tomorrow here. So stay tuned for that as well, everybody. Appreciate you joining us here this afternoon. And once again, thanks, Lauren.
No problem. Thanks, Bobby.
All right. And for everybody else, you know the deal. About to talk some sponsors. Athletic Greens, you know them, you love them. Go to athleticgreens.com/garden to get 75 vitamins, minerals, adaptogens, probiotics, and more when you head over there. I need it right now because this season change, you want to feel your best and you want to get everything you need for your body. And it's all available in here. You just got to make this one purchase. You're not going to different places. You're not worrying about what's in your diet. It's all here. Vitamins, minerals, adaptogens, probiotics, as I said, in one scoop each morning in your water. They're also going to throw in a year's supply of vitamin D and 5 free travel packs when you head over there. So go to athleticgreens.com/garden. And shout out to BetterHelp. This whole therapy thing can be complicated. May put it to the side until you have an emergency. You don't always need an emergency to go to therapies. You might just need to check in and talk to somebody. And people's biggest concerns with that are always flexibility, affordability, and convenience. BetterHelp brings all that to you. BetterHelp.com/garden. Get 10% off your first month. Try different therapists. Change whenever you want for any reason. That's a big plus. And again, it's all on your phone. Licensed therapist. BetterHelp.com/garden. Appreciate everybody being here. Uh, Thanks again to FanDuel as well. And thanks again to Lauren Williams, who joined us here. As I said, some sort of Sixers preview coming tomorrow. Might be the full crew. I'm sure it will be. And we'll have Celtics Sixers coverage as well as practice coverage tomorrow. Celtics practicing down at Auerbach tomorrow. So subscribe. Celtics All Access, CLNS Media. And for the Garden Report, I'm Bobby Manning. Thanks for joining us here this afternoon.